remotely.
Okay.
He's in there. Morning.
How are you?
Morning. Good, getting better.
That's mission control, the prime, I guess.
I was talking to
over
D-Rob
on
a few
the
minutes ago. He was
side
stuck on 71.
Rob.
So wanna hold up him?
Almost here. Well, I don't know. He should be here in a minute or two, I think.
Well, hold up to Deepak.
So, yeah,
I
that.
wouldn't.
Okay. Yeah, we
Get started until we get you.
That
We
one,
need him.
so theoretically,
Hmm?
turn
Yeah.
That's a good.
We won't need him until the end anyway, Jim.
Don't need him?
It's set up.
He just walked in.
Oh, okay.
Just taking his time.
Let's start. Mr. Deepak? Morning.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Morning.
All in favor?
That was a quick meeting.
Good morning, welcome to our workshop meeting, Sycamore Township, February the 18th, 2020. Mark the time at 9:01. And roll call, Mr. Porter.
Mr. LaBarber?
Here,
Mr. James?
Here.
Mr. Weedman? Present.
and you have the bills, you're up first, and receipts.
We had disbursements of $890,938.52, receipts of $99,173.44. I believe a complete listing is in your packet for your review.
Okay, any questions? Go to the sheriff's report
You want to do the minutes?
for the minutes, excuse me, approval of the minutes of the meeting.
Motion to approve
Second.
minutes from February 4th, 2020 trustee meeting.
Any discussion? Mr. Porter?
Mr. LaBarber?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Weedman?
Aye.
Okay. Corporal Kidd, you're up.
Nothing to report, sir.
Nothing. All right. And we'll turn it to Chief Penning.
I sent the January report to your email this morning. Apologize for being late, but I updated the report, created a database to track it this year so I can search things better than doing it in Excel. So I spent a couple weeks building that before I could release it, but it is out for your review as of this morning. And the other thing on my agenda here is the medical director that we now have, Dr. Jehanigan. He's no longer going to be available to us. He moved to Texas since he got taken out of UC, with that mess that he had back in the summer. He's now in Texas, so we are in pursuit of a new medical director. Now, the bad thing about it is that Dr. J was doing it for nothing because he was a longtime resident of the township, but I don't think we're going to have that luxury anymore. So, with your permission, we're going to do some interviews and pursue a different medical director, and we'll let you know what the cost is going to be. It's usually anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 a year is what they usually cost. So, right now we're looking at UC's doctor group that they have down there. They actually have a doctor group that is for medical directors. We get into that program, and if a doctor leaves, they just assign another doctor to us. Even if a doctor's not available, come out and do training or something like that, then they'll bring another doctor out. They work off of a network of doctors rather than just one.
Would that require our guys to go down there then?
No.
Will they come out here?
Oh, yeah, they'll come out.
Oh, good. Okay.
Chief, is it usually an ER doc?
Well, not necessarily, but usually. It doesn't have to be.
Can I just give you a name of somebody you might want to talk to? Her name is Anita Goyle, Goel, and she's an ER doc at UC, and her parents live in my neighborhood.
Okay.
So
Goyle?
She's young, she might need the money, so
Yeah,
that would be. And
Anita
she's
Goyle.
just had a couple of kids, so it might be a good fit, I don't know.
yeah. Check her
Let me just ask a question. Can you explain what the medical director does for us?
out. We have to, under the Academy of Medicine, with us having narcotics and drugs, we have to run under a doctor's license. So we're not only using their license as part of our functioning thing, but if there's any discrepancies in any type of run, any type of drug that's being used, if there's a problem with a run that we had where somebody dies, the medical director gets involved in making sure he's basically our cover to determine whether or not the medics did things to protocol versus not having anybody there to do it. He also has to sign off on all of our DEA usage, so any of our narcotic drugs, that drug, as far as DEA is concerned, that drug is assigned to that doctor, and then he transfers it to us. So we have to have that for any type of narcotic that we carry or give.
Okay,
Type of thing. They also have to, with the Academy of Medicine, they also have to review a certain amount of runs per year to make sure that, like QAM type of thing. So, and then they'll come out and do trainings, maybe like 4 times a year, 5 times a year, depending on what we ask.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask also, can everyone hear everyone up here? I know in our last meeting we had some microphone difficulties. In the back, you're good? Okay, thank you.
That's it, Chief?
Yeah,
Any other questions?
thank you.
Roads, maintenance, Tracy Kellums?
Yes, sir. So the first thing on here is the Kenwood Montgomery traffic study. You had asked that this be tabled at the last meeting and brought forth for more discussion today as far as the RFQ that we had put out for the traffic at the Kenwood Montgomery intersection. So we had talked a little about this. There's been some talk about the difference between us paying for it, a developer paying for it, who was going to do it. This really addressed an existing problem. We all know there's a problem at Montgomery and Kenwood, the Orchard area. We have a development going in there hopefully soon. So this would address all those issues. In my opinion, a consultant working for us would handle that situation along with looking out for our citizens in the neighborhood behind it. We don't want to just dump traffic on the citizens that are in the neighborhood behind Orchard, which for a developer, that's not really his concern. The development is his concern. Also, consultants that we use also help us in acquiring and securing grants for the improvements that are suggested. We've had great success with that also. We've used that with CMAC and STP, which is Surface Transportation Program, with Montgomery Road sidewalks, Sycamore Road. Those are just a couple of the examples. Also this year, there's an ODOT Highway Safety Program that they're paying 100% funding this year, which would include design. First submission for that is April. That would be hard to meet. The second submission is September, though. So we just brought that back up to talk about. The one thing if the township does it, we really control the project and what goes on in-house. If a developer does it, there's a chance that the county would be running it because it is Kenwood Road and Montgomery Road with the state. It wouldn't be our project then. So.
Would we be able to control the project, though, by doing an RFP, RFQ, some sort of process like that, specifying that neighborhood traffic needs to be taken into account and that we're just not going to look at it if it doesn't include those other things?
Yes.
So we could exercise some control and still have a developer pay for it?
That, yes.
Yeah, I think it probably could be a matter of we pick, they pay, if we get that far. So that we control the project, but we make it part of the negotiations with whoever is going to ultimately develop that space. That's one of the costs.
Like a reimbursement.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, my thought at this point is let's just move forward with a price, get a price from them, and that's it.
Ask
that
for a
would be-
proposal from them.
Yeah. That's my thought.
To get, sorry, go ahead. Well, to get to that, though, I think we do need some specifications as to what we want to see out of it, which is something we as a board may need to decide, or our administrators with expertise in those areas may need to decide and either present to us, or we give them authority to do that.
We went out for the,
I mean, that was pretty much in the scope.
it was in the
Think they-
scope, I
yeah.
think,
Oh,
already.
okay. That's true, we do have that,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
So, I would agree with Jim. I think we need to go move forward and try to find out what's gonna cost us, and, I agree with Tracy. You know, we've seen other developers come in and do, traffic studies, and they were not always to the township benefit, and I think the township should have control of this because how critically important the Kenwood-Montgomery Road, intersection is, and we've identified that's where the bottleneck is, and so we need to figure out how to fix it. And so, for us to have control, I think it makes a lot more sense than to have a developer come in and say, well, yeah, here's my traffic study, and it only benefits the developer. So, I think the best thing for us to do is to continue to move forward on this.
Agreed.
Okay?
Should we have a motion?
Yeah, I'd put it in a motion.
I'll make a motion, we proceed on the Kenwood-Montgomery Road traffic study.
Do you wanna make it a little more specific?
Yeah.
I think what I heard was a motion for him to, get a proposal, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, a proposal, I think, that would be from TEC, I believe, correct?
Second.
Mr. LeVar?
Sorry, as to TEC, that was the highest rated of the three candidates
Yes.
from before, as I
think that-
recall, so.
I think they were rated both by the township and by the county.
And by the county, yeah,
They
so-
both were the first.
Yeah, I want to note that for the record, but that's, I'm fine with proceeding in
And
that
we're
manner.
just proceeding, we're getting a quote, price quote. and
Right.
that's it, And then we're
Yeah.
not, okay. Aye?
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Weedman?
Aye.
The next is the Kenwood Road Traffic and Economic Impact Study that you asked, that I know you had, Mr. Flume put together a scope for that. We just kind of put these two together to, see, talk about these and see where we are on this. You know, obviously, the median went in as a result of a, traffic study that was done in 2010. So, I know the county, I believe the county was asked for comments on this. Just looking for some direction as to what you want to do with this. This would be one that, you know, I would think maybe, you know, we talk about developers doing, maybe, you know, you want the business owners to pay for this one. I mean, we did a study that recommended the median, and that's why the median was built. I mean, the study didn't justify the median came as a result of the study. When we first got our first submission from TEC, a second phase submission, there was not a solid median. It was several smaller medians. In a meeting with Mr. Hubbard on this in May of 2011, because we posted our RFQ in January of 11. In May of 11, Mr. Hubbard was the one that said, I don't want any breaks in the median. I would like to see it as a solid median. So then we went back to TEC, told them that was what was requested by the county engineer. And then they came back to us on June 3rd of that same year, 2011, with that presentation. And then we had public meetings, two public meetings, one in June, one in August, and then we didn't go out to our pre-bid meeting where we actually had contractors come in and talk to us. That wasn't until December of that year, so that was a whole year process of traffic studies and putting scopes together. So, with that being said, you know, do we want to pay for a study to go against what our original study said? I mean, that's up to you, gentlemen.
My thought right now is that, we go ahead to get the proposals out, see what comes back. Maybe nobody even wants to touch this. And, in the proposal that, Jack Flume put together, we also add Eric Beck's letter that he sent us. add those two together and send those out and see what we get back.
So you're talking about more of an RFQ, not for a proposal. You're
Right.
Qualifications.
RFQ, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you ended by saying that we want to do a study to go against what our study said before. We want to do a study to determine what the reality of the situation is, which might go against what our study said before or might confirm it. I think a study, starting with the RFQ process, makes sense as to that. It may well be a study comes back and says that despite what some of us think, the economic impact has been positive of that. Who knows? But I'll note the county, in their response to our proposed RFQ, said that they don't take economic impact into account when they do these. And I think it's important for our most vital economic region in the township that we do take that sort of thing into account, whether the county typically does that, looking only at traffic or not.
I think the dilemma we have is we don't own the road, the county owns the road. I think they're pretty adamant from this email, they're pretty adamant about the fact that they are not interested in the economic impact because their only job is to ensure that there's safety along that strip, along their road. And so, while I don't have any problems going out for an RFQ, I think that for us to continue to go down this road, I'm not sure how much sense it makes solely on the basis of, these guys have already told us, we're not cutting the median unless you can demonstrate that it's safer if we cut the median, and then if it doesn't, it's not cut. And the fact of the matter is, I'm sure we're gonna find that any cut, creating a left turn on either side of that road is gonna definitely increase or decrease the safety there. So, I mean, that's, the other thing was that when we did have the, before the median was put in, at peak times, we would have and he mentions it in his very first paragraph about traffic safety operations and impact on the interstate interchange with I-71. We had backed up traffic at peak times on the exit ramp, northbound exit ramp to Kenwood Road, all the way back, stacked on the shoulder of the highway to get off. That's a real safety issue. And now we're moving that traffic through the Kenwood Road corridor, which is a significant difference from where we were before. So I'm happy to go out, I'm happy to support an RFQ, but the reality is, I think this has been studied and studied and studied, and I think that we probably have it right here. And so, we can go out for an RFQ and see where we stand, but the reality is, I don't think that the changes that some people want to make by eliminating that median are going to be in the best interest of the safety of not just our residents, but those people who come to the Kenwood Business District to shop and whatever.
And you may well be correct that the study will show that in the end. I fully expect that any study saying opening a median and causing people to make left turns against oncoming traffic is certainly going to diminish safety in some way, but there are trade-offs that are made there. I mean, we could make the road even safer by putting big, large rubber bumpers on each side of it as well. I mean, there are trade-offs made in safety all the time. We could make the speed limit 5 miles per hour on there. That would certainly increase safety, but I think it would cause chaos. So there are trade-offs that are made in many ways as to that. That's not to say we should diminish safety in any substantial way, certainly. But there may be some compromises in there that allow some partial opening of the median that would make sense, or perhaps not. So again, I agree with Mr. Weedman. We proceed with the RFQ at least. Let's see where we get with this.
Just a point of clarification, the document that Jack Flume did is a request for proposal. Maybe semantics, it's not for qualifications. So if we did a request for proposal to multiple people, we would also, with that document, get the price.
Okay.
So I don't know if we should skip the one for Kenwood and Montgomery. We did a RFQ, and now we're going to get a proposal. What he drafted skips the RFQ, I think is the way to say it.
What do you and Mr. Kellums recommend in that regard?
I mean, usually the first step is always an RFQ to get qualifications, see what their team is that they've put together. You do a rating, and then you go out for a proposal. And that's the way we've always done it. It's a suggested way to do it.
The RFP, I think that he drafted, asks for those things. So maybe it can be done in one, I don't know.
I'm looking for a recommendation, I guess,
Yeah.
then, as to
I would
what
just
you-
do the RFP so we don't have to meet about it an additional time, because I
You
think.
do the RFP, like he said, it's gonna give you the same information, but it's also going to give you what their cost is
Yeah.
gonna be, their proposal.
Okay, if it's going to give us the same information and more, meaning cost, then yes, I think that makes sense to go with the RFP.
And then we're adding Eric Beck's letter to that,
Yes,
his involvement, okay. Good.
Are you good with that, Tom?
I am.
Yeah. Then I move we proceed with an RFP for the Kenwood Road corridor to conduct a traffic and economic study. That's sufficiently specific, Deepak. Thank you.
I'll second that.
Mr. LaBarber?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Weedman?
Aye.
Mr. Cullums?
Next, Happiness Way Road closure considerations. So you've asked that we bring this for discussion. I know we had, one citizen at the last meeting who was concerned about the closing of Happiness Way. I believe the hospitals also mentioned something about it. I believe you have a copy of the resolution with you that says Happiness Way will be closed. It doesn't, from what I remember, it doesn't really state when it will be closed. Is it during demo? Is it during construction also? Is it till after it's open and we check traffic? It just says the township will determine if the closure is to remain permanent. But then after that, it does say that there'll be no construction traffic of any manner on Frolic and in the neighborhood, which would include parking, standing, stopping. I don't know how you would force that on a public road if the road is open. So also, I believe, it's definitely a safety issue, I believe, with the traveling public going through there with all that work going on. We have talked to the hospital, and I know the developers talked to the hospital too. If there really is a problem with that being closed, I mean, we can put a gate there. The developer can put a gate there, or we can move the gate up. I would like to leave the gate by the road if you decide to move the gate up, even if it's open, so people don't just think that the road is completely open. Put the gate after the driveways so people could access that. I mean, there's really no public accessing that. It's mainly employees that access that drive. The public comes in off of Kenwood Road and off of Galbraith Road into the actual hospital, not off of Happiness Way. But these are all things that we can discuss. Get
The,
your thoughts on it.
The hospital, the fence is there, that's open now, so you can get into the hospital a lot off of Happiness?
Not
That
off
was
of
not-
Happiness, only off of Kenwood.
Okay.
So the Kenwood driveway attaches to that, hooks up to that same lot that the Happiness Way driveways do.
Yeah, we discussed this, there were 8 meetings we had,
Yes.
and this was, I thought this was a no-brainer. I mean, it seemed like everybody agreed on it. Tracy Hughes, we talked on the phone yesterday. Do you want to go up to the microphone and just tell them what you had heard from the developer? What one of the rumors was, or the story was going around? That the developer said, that it was permanently, was there something?
No,
Tracy Hughes?
at the meeting that the developer had in December, with the residents of our neighborhood, because construction was gonna start with, all get on the same page, people brought up Happiness Way, and the developer had said, we didn't close it, that's not our fight, we don't have a dog, we don't care one way or the other, that's what the township decided, so don't come to us about Happiness Way. That's what the developer told the neighbors, which is true, so. And we had many meetings, and the Jewish hospital had an issue with this, they never showed up at any meeting. But they were concerned about this, so I support keeping it closed at least through construction, and then we can revisit, in my opinion. I thought that this was a good thing in the approval of this project.
I think during our discussions, we talked about the closure of Happiness Way for the purpose of construction. And for us to decide to open that today and allow all the construction workers, perhaps not in, I mean, we could restrict them as to how much weight their vehicle is and whatever, but the reality is, we're gonna have construction workers going through there that are going to work, and it's a path of least resistance, so they're gonna go through the neighborhood. Frolic will be a mess. They'll wanna park on the road. They'll congregate on Frolic. That will aggravate all of the neighbors. It's just, I think it's a bad idea. If we're gonna decide to do that, we need to bring the residents in to get a better consensus as to exactly what they're thinking about whether the Happiness Way should be open or closed now, during construction, and post-construction. I'm of the opinion that if we open that even post-construction, that will still be the path of least resistance for a lot of people to get to and from that complex, and I don't think the neighbors will be happy with it. But I'm happy to do whatever the neighbors want. Whatever makes them the happiest is great with me, but the reality is, I think that for us to try to open that road now during construction, I think there's traffic issues, there's safety issues, there's all sorts of issues that I think would create serious problems for the township, for the residents, for those people who potentially go to work at Jewish Hospital. It's just not a good idea, in my opinion. But
I totally agree. I think when the construction's over, I think the residents, I think it was split. Some people want to keep it open, some didn't. And I think at that point, when you see what the project's gonna be, I think then we can revisit that. That's just my feedback.
Thank you.
We also have, money from the developer to do a traffic study, which they have already given to us. And that traffic study was going to be done after the development is over, so we can see what the impact of the traffic from the development is on the neighborhood.
And that makes sense. I had asked we put this on the agenda this week after Ms. Gannis had raised it in our last evening meeting. I've heard from her and others in the neighborhood, both pro and con as to this, frankly. It's something that I think we would need neighborhood input on, either through, it's a pretty limited population there, either through surveying them at some point or having a public hearing, and getting input that way before making a permanent decision once the project is finished. But Mr. Warwick and I had a meeting earlier this week and a nice tour as well at Jewish Hospital, meeting their president and vice president, and they were very concerned about lack of access to their driveways off of Happiness Way. Our specifications that are up on the screen there as to what was going to happen is Happiness was going to be closed west of the proposed access point to it from the development. Not entirely. Now, I will say, looking back at the myriad of construction drawings and architectural drawings that were also approved as part of this plan, there's a dim outline of a fence, partly where they have one now on one of those drawings. But this seems to be at odds with that somewhat in terms of what we propose there anyway. I don't know that it's unreasonable to have them push that back in some way, or, as Mr. Kellum suggested, leave the gate there at Kenwood open, but have it, or Kenwood Road, but have it open in some way for hospital access. The problem that the hospital people expressed to us was that on that side of the hospital, the ambulance is competing for traffic with workers who are coming in and out as well through the entrance from Kenwood Road. And they've already got a pretty tight driving perimeter around there as it is. So the loss of those driveways has made it even tighter and a potential safety issue. They stressed they'd really like that reopened if it's possible. So would it be possible to do two things? Either leave the gate there and leave it open. I don't know if that deters others from coming in or not, or push the gate back in some way with a sign that says hospital access only there. And secondarily, is there pedestrian access from Frolic? From Frolic forward along the sidewalk? Because the fence, did it encroach across the sidewalk too? Okay, so you can walk from Frolic safely to Kenwood Road. Okay, all right, then that's not a concern. But in terms of enabling access for the hospital, they seemed pretty concerned about that. Mr. Warwick, was there anything else you heard that I didn't mention?
Yeah, they also use those two driveways for deliveries and those kinds of things, and that's throwing them off. And that gate wouldn't have to be, those two driveways are very close to Kenwood Road.
Yeah.
So it could be that just by moving that gate back and letting them have the access, maybe that could work. But we did talk to the hospital about safety concerns, and they understand that.
I can definitely see it being a problem with deliveries. I was down there one day and they had a semi in there, pulled all the way up to it. And obviously he had to back all the way out
Sure.
because there's no gate, so I can definitely see that being a problem. Cause it wouldn't be easy to maneuver a semi in reverse through that parking lot and all
Yep.
those islands.
No way.
Yeah. Is there anything we can do about that, and does doing something about that require a trustee vote, or is that an administrative
I
thing?
don't
Because
think
frankly,
it would.
let me finish, our approval
Yeah, I don't
already
think
says
it-
close it, west of the construction point, not east. So what can we do?
I don't think it would require a trustee vote. We can talk to the developer. I would like to leave the gates that are there now, like I said, so it appears that the road is closed, so you don't get a lot of traffic pulling in that has to now turn around, put an additional set of gates past the hospital driveway, if that's what it is you want, or they can even put gates on the hospital driveway. But, I mean, I'm assuming that they want 24-hour access
They
to
do.
that.
Yeah, I think
That's
so.
not just gonna be a daytime thing, I wouldn't think.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah, so if a gate is just there for show at the roadway, maybe that's a deterrent, maybe not, maybe a sign that just says hospital access
Yeah.
and construction access only does the same thing. That's something, use
Okay.
your best discretion for, and talk to the hospital if you would, so we can accommodate their concerns for safety as well.
Take care of it.
Thank you.
Mr. Kellums?
So the next thing, our Parks Advisory Committee applicants and, charter direction. And I have, Mr. Petty in here today. I believe you've all received a copy of what we were looking to do with the committee. We currently have, we had asked for 6 people, with Mr. Petty being the chair and being the 7th person on that advisory committee. And we currently have 8 applicants throughout all areas of the township. So I just wanted to bring this to you to see if you had comments about the charter that was put together, and if you wanted to move on this now or continue to keep it open for more resumes.
So-
Just looking for some direction.
So I have not received any of those resumes. I don't know if you two
I
have or
haven't
not.
either.
I've seen some, but not all.
So I think it might be prudent to have those distributed to the trustees for review, and ultimately, I'll make sure Jason has them, and ultimately, I think, Jason, we would like a recommendation from you as to if maybe you meet with them and talk to them and try to determine how to best form your group, I think would be an advantage for us, so.
Okay.
This advisory committee and charter, Mr. Warwick, you put this together, didn't you?
No, we got that from, somewhere.
Where did-
Genius?
Yeah, so we looked all over the place. That is an adaptation of what we received from Xenia. And Mr. Petty and myself went over that and put that
Okay.
together.
Okay. If this is going to be the charter of the committee, I think it's something the trustees need to vote on and approve then.
Absolutely.
And I have reviewed this, it's satisfactory to me, so I will go ahead and move that the board approve the document here, which forms the charter of the Sycamore Township Parks Advisory Committee and the rules stated therein.
I'll second.
Mr. LaBarber?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Weedman?
Aye.
May I make a request also? Mr. Petty, could you, we have some members of the public here, and we're making video as well, and I'd like to know too, can you explain what it is you've been doing with parks over the last few years of your employment, and how you've transitioned into this role, and what you're doing now? And you probably should come to the microphone to do that if you could. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jason Petty. I've been working here since 2009. I am the supervisor, the Parks and Public Spaces supervisor for Sycamore Township. In the last couple of years, I've kind of taken over a supervisory role that we didn't really have at the township. It was myself and 2 temporary employees that would go around and do all the maintenance of the parks, administrative complexes, any of our right-of-way mowing. And in the last few years, we've actually added a crew to the grass cutting that does the right-of-way mowing. So now I'm actually taking care of scheduling all of the grass mowing for the parks and the right-of-way mowing, also scheduling all of the ball field maintenance and scheduling of the Schuler Sports Complex with Nick Chachaw. And I also do the fertilizing program that we have here in-house. So we do our fertilizing program. I control that, or I should say I schedule that. I do it myself as well. So, and the Parks Advisory Committee, I believe, is going to be new this year. I think it was shut down last year. I think from lack of just people not really showing up or whatnot. So this is kind of a new thing that I've been asked to look at. And you know, other than that, scheduling all of the operations for the parks is pretty much what I've been in the last few years.
Does that include scheduling usage of the fields as well, or?
Well,
Okay.
that's going to be new to me this year after Mike McEwen retired. So that has been something that I've been doing here recently, scheduling all the ball fields and everything.
Well, thank you.
And scheduling something like the car show, anything that Mike was doing aside from scheduling the community room at Schuler and the shelters at Beckville. I've pretty much been ready to take over.
Jason, our next workshop is March 3rd. Do you think you can give us a summary of your 6 that you pick out of the group at that time?
Yeah.
And then we'll get the bios on each individual.
Okay. I
Okay.
can do that.
Good. Thank you.
Yep.
Now, that is also still on the website, so would you like us to continue if people?
I think so,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should keep soliciting new applicants, even after we form a board. I think it's useful to have that out there. We may get interest from other people as well. This is the sort of thing where we need to get people's attention over it, and
Yes.
I'm a little surprised we've only gotten 8 applications so far.
So where are we?
Yeah, maybe we could make a renewed push on social media as well, again, just noting, hey, here's the opportunity, and we're looking to make some decisions soon. We have our newsletter coming up also, of course, which, Ms. Gunderson, what's our expected in the mail date for that?
Middle of March.
Okay. We may want to consider whether we wait for that to go out too, with a notice in that as to this. That might get some more attention from people who don't look at electronic media. Yeah, I don't want to make a rash decision of just
Sure.
picking some people suddenly as opposed to trying to get a bunch of people to apply for it first so we know who's out there. But we do need to get things moving with parks as summer's coming around especially too, so we can't wait too long.
I still would like to see your picks of your top 6, okay,
Yeah.
at the next workshop when we talk about it.
And I do, there are 3 that I don't have resumes for. If you guys want to have them available for everybody, I have only a few that I don't have resumes for.
We'll
that
get-
I know are in there.
We'll get them.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And let me add as to that point, though, when we're looking for citizens to advise as to things, it's nice to have a resume when one's available, but we want some average people in the township who are doing this who may not normally prepare resumes for various things. So if they can state their qualifications in some other way, I don't know that we should strictly require a resume from people. There may be retired people who haven't put one of those together for years, for example.
I think we're using
Just
the
a
term
letter of
resume
interest.
generically,
Yeah.
so I think any kind of information that they can give us on their background would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I might, especially even, so I know part of the thing that we were looking at was areas from the township, so even if it was just a name and address, would be probably sufficient, like maybe how long they lived in the township.
Mhm.
So that's really all I was.
And that's probably something we want to weigh too, because if we have 2 from the same area and they're both really outstanding, and somebody that's a little weaker from another area, maybe we want to go with the 2 from the other area, pick the best candidates, rather than necessarily bound by that restriction of the area where they live. All right, any other questions? Can move on. You all done, Trace?
I am.
You are done. Okay, with Law Director now, depart the side.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have something to pass out just so people can take a look at what we're talking about. There should be enough for everyone here and out there in the audience. And sit down this way as well. So, as everyone may recall, the CIG development is a development that the township is interested in forming a joint economic development district for. And Deer Park, the city of Deer Park has agreed to partner with us for that district. There's a process to setting up the district, and one of the process items is we have to have a public hearing, and then one of the other process items is we have to circulate a petition. So on the handout that I just gave you under item 1, you'll see under A, it says that we have to hold a public hearing, and B, we have to circulate a petition. The public hearing is kind of self-explanatory. It needs to be held here at the Township Hall. As you can see in number 2, there's 30 days of advance notice to the public required. That notice is to be published in a newspaper of general circulation such as the Enquirer. And during the notice period, in Mr. Porter's office, there's supposed to be certain documents that you see delineated there in little I, 2 little I's, and 3 little I's. But basically, it's the contract between Deer Park and the township. It's a description of the district area along with the map. And I can tell you the contract that we have put together does have attached to it as an exhibit a map of the area because that's required by statute. And then the final item is a schedule for the collection of tax, which we'll probably need to get from the city of Deer Park because they would be the ones collecting the tax. But basically, that's the first piece of it, is the public hearing piece of it. And again, notice 30 days, publish it in a newspaper, and have the documents available for the public during that 30-day time period. The third piece of it, the second piece of it, item 3, is the petition requirements. And basically, we have to circulate that to property owners within the district and business owners. I will confirm this with Mr. Miller, but my view of the area map would indicate that there are no residents that are going to be in the Joint Economic Development District. So I would see that petition primarily just going to the business owners there. And as I understand it, there might just be one.
Yes.
So,
And do we do a petition and Deer Park does a petition, or can we petition together?
there's only one petition, so we could take the lead on that and they would not need to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point that Mr. Ward has made. However, both bodies have to have their own public hearings. So,
They're prepared to do that.
So, I did put in, in item 4, just some things maybe kind of looking forward. The Board of Trustees does not need to submit the resolution that would come after the hearings approving the contract to the electors, provided, as it says in 4A, there is a unanimous vote to approve the JED, the Joint Economic Development District. And then, of course, the other two minor things, that you complied with the petition requirement, you got the signature, and that the area is properly zoned for the project that's going up there. Any questions, gentlemen? Nope.
Actually, I have one. I understand there may be a change in ownership as to the commercial building there as construction begins, as to the land under it. I don't know where that falls in our process, but it may not be too far out with demolition coming. How does that affect the petition and the hearings and so forth if one owner signs and then there's a change in ownership?
We would go with the owner of record according to Cages on the day that we sent the petition.
Okay, we need to make sure we're in line with that in terms of our timing then and move ahead on this.
Yeah, so, and that would apply really to any type of notice that we would send out for the township. Say, for example, for a BZA hearing. It's possible a sale could be pending, but we always go with the record owner. But that's good to note, and maybe we'll touch base with the developer just to make sure we're out in front of that.
Yeah, and just for the public's reference as well, part of the plan that I understand Capital Investment Group has is the commercial building is going to be developed by another developer on the site. So they plan to transition ownership of that ground to them as part of that, which is not uncommon in large multi-use projects, I understand. Capital has indicated, to me at least, that they plan to keep ownership of the residential part of it after they construct it. They're not spinning it off somewhere, but the commercial building will be built by someone else.
Buck,
That's all I have, sir.
okay, and Ray Warwick, our administrator, right?
Yes, the first item is the electronic check signing. We did touch base with the state auditor's office to see if we could convert from,
I'm sorry to interrupt, kind of back up just a minute. If we have to have a public hearing, should we go ahead and schedule that now, or do we need to wait for the petition? Because again, timing could be a concern if there's going to be an ownership change there. Sorry to interrupt, Ray.
My plan was to touch base with Mr. Warwick, about what kind of leg time we needed to get the notice together and the publication out in the newspaper, and then set a hearing date based on a reasonable time to allow that to occur.
Okay.
So, if it's all right with everybody, I'll work with Mr. Warwick and Mr. Miller to get that squared away, and then we'll confirm with everybody that that works for their schedule.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
and we'll coordinate with Deer Park so that we're in the same time frame. They're waiting for the instructions from us, so we'll take care of that. So electronic check signing, like I say, we checked this through the auditor's office to see if we can convert to having the checks electronically signed, and then you folks wouldn't have to manually sign the checks anymore. And the ultimate approval of being able to issue those checks, of course, comes from the board, because you'll still have a motion to pay bills, and Mr. Porter always signs off on the check register. So that's in line with the way it can be done. So if you want to move in that direction, I have a form for all four of you to sign today, so we can get that set up in the computer. I don't know if you-
Just, Ray talked to me about this from the beginning, and I'm open to doing it. I have no problem with, it's a pain for us all to sign checks, I acknowledge that. The reason that it was done that way is in a past audit, you know, not necessarily 4 years ago, maybe 12 or 16 years ago, the auditor, I broached this subject with the auditor because none of us like spending an hour signing checks. But the auditor told me at that time that, you know, we couldn't do it. We had to, he didn't like electronic signatures, so to speak. I guess with the passage of time, the auditor's feeling on that has changed. I've reviewed the things that Ray sent out, and it, you know, the way we have it, the way he proposes to set it up would meet the requirements of the auditor, and I have no objection to doing it that way. But it is, as I say, it's up to you guys whether you want to review each check and you know, see it before we sign it going out. But I have no problem with the electronic version. It is more efficient, no question.
In doing it, and something I think we should do, we each of the trustees, for the public's reference, gets a report in advance of these meetings as to checks that are going to be signed to go out. Our accounting system is a little dodgy, I think, in its reporting. Frankly, it's kind of hard to read some of this. I know it's the best we can do right now, but it would be helpful to at least have this and have us certainly approve signature on these checks electronically based upon the report we're given in advance. Perhaps that's an additional audit control, or do you think that's necessary?
What's that?
I mean, we're going to have to approve this I'm thinking out loud, sorry, here. We're going to have to approve this anyway as to these checks, correct?
Right.
Or not? Well, but if their expenses under 2,500, we don't need a PO for it.
Right.
I just want to make sure we still have sufficient audit controls in place. Do you,
Well, the way we do it now is before we even do a check, we have a, you know, an administrator or department head initial the invoice that it's okay to pay. And so, you know, the check is attached to the invoice, so you can look at the invoice and see that it was signed off on by a department head, and then sign it. That's what takes the time, frankly, to do all this thing. We can put it in any, you know, the list I have is much more readable than what you have here. The one in the office is more readable. So yeah, we can do it however you want, but I agree with Ray, though it'd be much more efficient to do it with the, with the electronic signature.
Oh, I
Yeah,
agree.
And with you, and then, as I say, we'll still have the invoice initialed by the, so if you see something on the list that you say, hey, their US Bank credit card, there was 20,000 spent this month. Well, we all know what that was. There was high expenses on that for the convention, but you could see that it was signed off by somebody. That somebody looked at that and said, well, these are legitimate expenses, signed off on it. Then we issue a check, and then the amount shows up on the list. So
Oh, okay.
that's,
The-
I
the
mean, that's the mechanics of it. We're not gonna change that.
The other control we would need, and this is a minor point, but something I encountered recently, I put in for my tax refund from the CIC for money paid into the JEDs, and I, of course, can't sign a check to myself. There are other checks that might incidentally be paid for reimbursement or other things to trustees. We'd want to make sure someone's signature isn't electronically applied to a check payable to them.
Those will be manual checks.
Okay.
All CICs are gonna be manual, or?
Well, not all, not all of them, but if a check goes to, Tom James,
It'll be
pulled
pulled out.
out, and then,
Signed by-
Tom
signed
Weedman and Jim
manual.
LaBarbera
Well,
can
it's
sign.
much easier to sign one manual check than 100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's fine.
Yeah, it's not uncommon that when townships go to this method, that you'll still have a handful of manual checks here and there.
I'm absolutely 100% behind it. It's 2020, we move on. Electronic age, absolutely. Just want to point out that Mr. Porter has lost 30 pounds. So congratulations to you, since the beginning of the year.
Not many people have noticed, but that's okay.
Actually, I was sitting here just noticing, thinking you looked thinner, but okay.
Can-
Good work.
Can we have him?
Must mean I was really fat before. No.
He wore it off signing all those checks.
That's right.
Should we have a motion to move to the electronic signing, and then
I'll move that we move, sorry, I move that we adopt electronic signing, can't speak today. I move that we adopt electronic signing of our township checks in accordance with the auditor's recommendations in the township handbook, to remove the need to manually sign most checks going forward.
I'll second.
Mr. LaBarbera?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Weedman?
Aye.
Thank you. Second item is Focus Capital Solutions Consulting Agreement. This is the lobbyist group that's housed in Taft Law. I was unaware that we had this, but we've had it for some time. I met with George Glover, I believe it is, who runs this thing, and my questions were simply, well, what do we get? I think we're paying $2,000 a month. What do we get for that? And he talked about some historical things that he may have helped with. I don't know that he pinpointed anything specifically. Well, I know he didn't, that he just did for Sycamore Township. He tends to work on things that if we wanted something, it would benefit other townships. There was no really pressing thing on the horizon that we would use him for. We kind of just, as we were talking, he said, if the trustees wanted to end the contract, he said, I think that's fine, because you can always engage me on a project basis. And he's comfortable if you wanted to go in that direction. To end the contract, we could do the rest of this year, or if we gave him notice, we would have to pay him for 3 more months.
I'm for terminating the agreement with him. I'm confused as to why we have this. I've been a trustee for more than 2 years, and I had no idea. And I understand that this man actually worked in Columbus to work on eminent domain for action against one resident. I'm surprised that we have somebody on a payroll for $2,000 a month to do this. I think we can use him if we need him on a per item basis.
I was surprised to learn about this when I first learned about this about a week ago, that we've had a lobbyist on payroll. I went back and looked at prior township actions, and the minutes reflected that in 2013, I believe it was, actually early as 2009, the township explored hiring a lobbyist. Actually signed the first contract in late 2013 with this lobbying company. I think we've been paying $2,000 a month since then. I'm not certain of the amounts early on, and if that changed when it was less. Okay, in 2017, the trustees approved a renewal of the contract, and according to Ohio checkbook, at least from looking at that, we paid $72,000 in lobbying expenses through December of this past year, just since the start of 2017. Before that, perhaps it was a little bit less. I don't know what we're getting out of this. I'd like to know that. Mr. Weidman, you were part of adopting. Can you explain?
So we hired him back, as you probably know, as an unincorporated area in a township, as an unincorporated area in the state of Ohio. We are at the mercy of the state legislature for everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. They make all our rules. They change all our rules. And so when we had some issues going back to the JEDZ, the JEDs that we put in place. As you probably know, they don't exist anymore except for those that grandfather. And George Glover was extremely instrumental in allowing us to work with Representative Schuring to get through that process prior to the elimination of the joint economic development zones. We were one of the last joint economic development zones in the state of Ohio that were approved prior to them eliminating them. When in the process of eliminating joint economic development zones, they also went to change the joint economic development districts, of which we are about to establish one right now. At that time, I had expressed interest to George and said, look, George, before they start changing all those rules, they're continue to take tools out of our toolbox as townships. We have very few as it is. And when you continue to take tools out of our toolbox, it creates a problem for our townships. And so I went and said, look, George, I want you to set up a meeting with Representative Schuring. He's going to be the author of this bill. Before he does anything, I want to make sure that I have input on that. So he set up a meeting downtown. I met with Representative Schuring. I gave him 5 or 6 points that I was interested in making sure that were included in the new legislation. And all of those were included in the new legislation. When we had the Cincinnati Waterworks situation where Cincinnati Waterworks wanted to increase unfairly the rate for water for townships, George was very instrumental in helping me to get through some of the process so that we, with different individuals, so that we could eventually get to John Cranley and make a deal with John Cranley. As you know, the OTA represents all townships, all 1,308 townships in Ohio. They represent those townships that are size like 500 residents very well, because they have unique, totally different issues than large urban townships. We do have a group called Clout, which is large urban townships. They do a fair job, but the reality is, if you want to control your own destiny, you need an advocate in the legislature to do so. And George has been an advocate for us in the legislature on various issues. There was an issue about the building permits, and I know you two gentlemen didn't necessarily think that was a good idea, but when you hear the challenges that developers have in getting building permits out of the county, and that's all about economic development. And I mean, we hear it from the Kenwood Town Center. It's the same thing. They have issues all the time with the building permits. So whether you like it or you don't like it, the fact of the matter is these are the kind of things that George does as our representative, as our advocate with the legislature, in an effort to ensure that we can help control our own destiny versus letting somebody else control our destiny. So that's a there's a synopsis of just some of the things that have occurred.
I don't question the wisdom of hiring him early on for the JEDS project, especially. I think that makes sense, frankly. I guess the concerns I have now, first of all, do we still need him, in your opinion?
I'll yield to you two on that. Frankly, I think that it's always beneficial to have somebody being your eyes and ears with the legislature in Columbus. So for what he has done for us versus what we have paid for him, we have been the significant winners in this deal. So the question is, would you like to continue to have an advocate? I think it's not a bad idea to have an advocate in the legislature, only because, once again, they control our destiny. We do not make the rules, they do. And so if we have the ability to continue to help form those rules, it's a benefit to Sycamore Township.
Okay, and my other thoughts are as to that. I think as needed, I understand he'd still be available for that on an individual basis. Mr. Warwick has a lot of connections there as well. But my bigger concern about all this is just looking back through the minutes, trying to figure out what the history of this guy was when I learned about it. That he seems to be a very effective advocate for the township and for his other clients. But being an advocate means you're advocating a position, which means you're taking a position, which means someone needs to tell you what that position is to take on behalf of the township. And there's no record of the decision-making body of the township adopting positions to ask him to take in doing that. And my fellow trustee, Mr. LaBarbera, who's been on this board for 2 years, didn't know this guy was under contract with us or that we even had him available. So who was telling him what positions to advocate? Because it wasn't by a vote of the Board of Trustees over the last several years.
I believe that was our administrator.
Okay, well, again, there's no record of the positions
I'm sure that it
being
was the
adopted.
administrator based on what the trustees were asking him to go forward with, so.
But there's been no vote as to positions to be taken, has there?
Well, it says there Waterworks, I didn't know that. You told Bickford to tell him to go ahead and do this and work with you on this? Well, I was on the board at the time.
No. I worked with George. I asked George to facilitate a number of meetings, including the original meeting with John Cranley, of which he did. So.
And that was a good thing.
That's not something I would come to the board and say, look, do you think it's okay if I meet with John Cranley to try to work out a deal on water? That's not what I would come to the board for. So that's one example.
Right. My point is, if he is lobbying, on the other hand, or advocating for particular changes or lack of changes in legislation before the legislature, taking a position like that is something that the board, I think, would need to vote upon to do that. That's why I was surprised to learn we had this contract, because lobbyist implies he's lobbying for something, and that something needs to be publicly decided. It seems we don't need him currently, at least, and I think we should terminate the contract at this point for that reason. If we need to bring him back on board, he's no question he's very capable at doing what he does and a great resource to have and could be very helpful to us. But I think at this time right now, we don't need to continue with this. So did we have a motion pending yet? I don't know that we
Exactly,
did.
the eminent domain, he did do the eminent domain, didn't he?
I'm
To
not
put the
familiar with what
garage.
you're
As I
talking about in
understand
the eminent domain.
Eminent domain to Mr. Pansero. You threatened him that you could put a garage in his site, on his site.
I've never even heard of that. I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no clue what you're talking about.
You did not?
Eminent domain from what?
You were gonna take his building, you could take his building by eminent.
Mr. LaBarbera, the thing that Mr. Glover worked on eminent domain was state legislation. It wasn't based on any specific
Any
incident.
specific one.
So,
That would
yeah,
apply
it
to
had
that.
nothing to do with
That
that,
would
but
apply to that.
but it was some adjustment in eminent domain, and I didn't go back and see what that was. But yes, he did work on that.
For the record, Mr. LaBarbera, I have no idea what you're talking about. There was never any threat of eminent domain that I know of in Sycamore Township in the 14 years I've been a trustee. Never. So I have no idea what you're talking about, and I think Ray has already explained.
Okay, I
It
can
was
absolutely.
a general eminent domain subject and not having to do with anybody in our township. So that should be make sure we get that on the record.
Well,
please.
make sure you're on the record too, that I can bring somebody in here and we can discuss that if you would so desire.
I'd love to.
So if I could suggest, we were at the point where we were trying to decide whether to entertain a motion to terminate the contract with Focus Capital Solutions LLC, and I believe Mr. James is ready to make a motion.
Yes, I move that we terminate the contract with Focus Capital Solutions LLC.
I'll second
Mr. LaBarber?
that. Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Weedman?
Aye.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is employee handbook language. We don't have any language. We thought we were going to have some today to bring forth. I asked about having some language in our employee handbook that described the township's responsibility and the employee's responsibility with respect to political activity. Many, many townships around the state have language like this in their handbooks. And I think everybody understands the First Amendment challenges that come up when somebody goes down that path. So we're working on it. We can produce, we have produced language from several townships where they've put things in their handbook. I've asked Deepak to try to come up with language that we could use to address this in a way that we wouldn't be totally hanging out there and have something that's totally unenforceable or inappropriate. And we don't have the language yet today.
Mr. Warwick, for the record, you said many townships have language. I'm not sure that that's accurate. Do you have any statistics on that at all?
I don't know how many, but we have several examples already.
Several examples, but there's 1,308 townships. I'm
Yeah.
just curious if do you have a statistics on how many actually put
I
that
do.
in there?
I do not.
Okay. Can I ask you this political activities language? Who wrote this?
That was adopted from one of some language we got from another township. I don't remember exactly which one. And then I wrote a couple of the sentences on there.
Okay. Let me just say for the record, I am adamantly opposed to abridging the First Amendment rights of our employees. Absolutely opposed to it. This subjects the township to potential litigation and financial liability. This is really not broken. I'm not sure why we're trying to fix something that's not broken, number one. What we're going to do is we're going to prohibit our employees from, what are we going to prohibit our employees from next? Are we going to restrict their religion because they don't like to practice the religion they practice? This, to me, where does this end? I don't totally understand it. I would suggest that what a person does on their own time is none of my business and should be none of the township's business as well. If they're on their own time, they can do as they choose. They can practice the religion they want. They can choose everything that they want to do without us restricting them. Our employees took a job with the township. We never told them when they took the job with the township that we were going to come back and restrict their freedom of their First Amendment rights. We never told them that. For us to suggest that this is a good idea to put in our handbook now is offensive to me. It's absolutely offensive. I cannot support this. I cannot support restricting our residents' First Amendment rights. This is America. They can do as they choose, and that's the beauty of living in this country. So to suggest that it's a good idea to restrict their First Amendment rights is offensive to me.
I would agree. I don't want to restrict our employees' First Amendment rights either, but I do want to protect them from undue influence. The federal government for many years has had what's called the Hatch Act, and most states have what are called mini Hatch Acts, named after the promulgator of that bill. But what it does is it protects employees of governmental bodies from being coerced into politicking for their bosses and from having that pressure. And that has been something that as a resident I've witnessed appearing to happen in the township in the past, and I'd like to protect our employees from those pressures. What they do on their own time outside of the township is their own business, frankly. But they shouldn't be pressured by their boss here in the township, or even feel that pressure, even if it's not there, in having to campaign for their boss at some point or do political activities. That's apparently been a long-standing tradition in Hamilton County offices, not just in Sycamore Township. But I don't think it's right. I think people should be free to go out about their jobs without worrying about what their boss thinks about what they think about things that have nothing to do with their job. So that's why this has come up. But we need to find a useful balance there where we're not infringing on people's First Amendment rights. Mr. Desai has done some research on this already, and I think you found some information about compelling government interest in this regard. Perhaps you should share that.
Well, no, you know what, we're going down a path that we haven't started yet. We're still getting research on this. But I want to point out that in objections to, with all due respect to Mr. Weedman, when I ran in 2017, Tracy Kellums stood in front of Deer Park High School all day long. He was then, in less than a month, rewarded with a contract that is a perpetual contract of over $100,000 a year. And he was given a raise of over $5,500. Every person, every township worker who was out there working the polls received a raise of over 5%. I think when you have a situation.
That's not true.
That is true.
That's
This
not
this year is true for sure.
That's not
5.8% to Steve. That's true. Just look at the payroll. But that's exactly what happened. You did get a raise of over $5,500 and a contract that was no road supervisor in the state of Ohio has a contract like that. But that happened directly after that. I think there's due pressure on employees. If you're working, if Joe Jones is working and Joe Smith is next to him, well, I'm gonna volunteer and help out, then you're gonna feel the pressure. So I think there is pressure, and I think in the past, I know that there was one trustee, who said, hey, this is an at-will township, that was perceived as a threat. So I think this has gone on long enough in Sycamore Township. This year, we didn't have that much, and you have said in the past, they can vote and support the candidate they want. Well, they don't even live in the township. Over the years, people who are working the polls didn't even live in the township. So that's all I have to say. But we're not far enough along on this to discuss this yet. We're still waiting. We have outside lawyers looking at this also.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, there are two different things we're discussing. And the first piece is really non-controversial as far as First Amendment rights go, which is if the township, and again, so everyone understands, the Board of Trustees is the legislative branch of the township. It enacts policy. Mr. Warwick is the chief executive officer, for lack of a better term, who, through his staff, administers the policies that the trustees hand down. And I, as the law director, for lack of a better analogy, act as the judiciary branch, where I try to let people know the legal aspects of what they're thinking about doing. So the first piece about letting employees know that there's no effect on their job with regard to supporting or not supporting levies, candidates, whatever. That is a noble aspiration, and I think everyone's going to agree that that should be the way it's run. That you should be your job should be based on how you perform, the needs of the township, and the revenue that's available to fund that position. So that's the first piece of the policy that we're discussing, which in my opinion is very non-controversial because it doesn't touch on the First Amendment at all. It's just letting everybody know that
Totally agree.
we're going to judge you based on how you do your job and the other factors I mentioned. The second piece of it, just very briefly, there is a balancing. Government is allowed to restrict your speech to some extent. You can't go into a movie theater and yell fire. They're allowed to stop you from doing that, and there are obvious reasons for that. But there's all this analysis the courts goes into, but what it comes down to basically is the courts have said, hey look, we think governments have a compelling interest to make sure that their work environments remain apolitical, remain neutral. And we're going to allow you in your manuals to restrict employees for that purpose. The catch is how you do it. You can't just throw out a phrase and let everybody wonder what that means. If you say you can't engage in political activity, does that mean I can't put a bumper sticker on my car? Is that political activity? Or does it mean I can't work the poll? And that's where the courts draw the line. They just basically say, hey, we recognize there's a compelling interest, but you gotta be very specific, and there are certain things you can't cross. For example, you can't tell an employee they can't have a conversation with their neighbor about which candidate they might support. They're allowed to do that. You can't tell an employee's family member that they can't express their views. That goes too far. You can't stop an employee from making posts on social media entirely. So that's where the rub lies. We have to be very specific, and we have to be careful that what we do is narrowly tailored to serve that legitimate, compelling government interest to keep the work environment neutral.
Up next,
I skipped over an item,
you
I'm
got-
sorry.
oh, yeah, make
The Hamilton County Public Health District Advisory Council, they asked that the chairman of the board be a member, the chairman of the township board be a member of that, or have somebody else appointed. I think Mr. LaBarbera has said that he would be happy to be a member of that board.
yes, yes,
Do we need a motion for that, Deepak?
no,
I don't think we do.
no.
Okay.
This is a, I've served the last 14 years on this. This is just a representative of each township, because we contract with, Hamilton County Public Health District is our
Health inspector.
health inspector, so we vote on board members and that kind of thing. So they have an annual, they have a mandatory annual meeting, of which this is at March 9th.
If I may, I think we probably do need a motion appointing someone, then investing that authority in them just as a legal matter.
I agree.
Okay,
I agree.
go ahead.
Yeah, so I move that we appoint Mr. LaBarbera as the board's designated representative to the Hamilton County Public Health District Advisory Council.
Second?
Mr. LaBarbera?
Aye,
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Weedman?
Aye.
And then lastly, we put back on the agenda township email notices and newsletters. We had a brief discussion about that last time. I think Mr. James.
Right, I had asked that we place this on the agenda simply because I would like us to be moving ahead with that and with our, with some sort of better email noticing as a form of newsletter, in addition to our printed one, which I think we need to continue. There are a lot of people who simply don't read email, a lot of older residents especially who prefer mail, and some younger ones too. But with our newsletter deadline coming up and our newsletter coming out in March, that's an ideal opportunity to start soliciting email addresses from our residents, for those who we don't have, because for many of them we don't have that. And if people want to opt into a newsletter, I think we need to get moving on that. That's why I wanted to put that as a discussion topic here. We have our action line system now, and we use that to push out zoning agendas, trustee agendas. So we do have a database there of certain email addresses already, but I think if we're going to be sending out some other newsletters, we need to start moving with that. I don't have a concrete proposal as to how to do that right now, but I thought I wanted to bring that to the board's attention and ask if others have suggestions. We need to either do this in-house or find a service to do it, which is something that Mr. Warwick and others can locate. Ms. Gunderson puts together our newsletter primarily now, don't you, Beth? So I don't know if you have preferences in electronic means yet as to what to do. Maybe you and Mr. Warwick could put your heads together on that as to how to go about it. MailChimp is one of the services out there. I know there are plenty of others who are competitors that some local governments use. But I think we should put a solicitation of some form in our newsletter asking for those addresses, and maybe set up a web form, if nothing else, through our existing action line system, where people could go to a specific location on our website to go ahead and enter their address to subscribe for notices going forward. We have that to some extent already, so maybe we can just use what we have there for that. Is that workable?
We do have that capability now for people to go in and add their name to the distribution list to get the email newsletter.
Okay.
So, if we want to do that through Constant Contact or some other.
Well, or we can gather the addresses through our own system and use whatever we need to push it out later. I suggest that's better left to you guys on the staff here, since you get to deal with it every day, and not us meddlers who are over here voting on things.
We will look into it.
Maybe the president's report you could put on there about wanting to do that.
yeah. We'll do that in the newsletter.
on the newsletter.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll get something. Mr. Warwick, anything else?
That's all I have.
Okay, we're gonna turn it over now to our head of the zoning department and planning department, Mr. Skylar Miller.
I'm sorry, may I ask one other thing? The law director had one other item on the agenda. Is that off the agenda now? We had skipped over that earlier.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Miller?
All right, yes, sir.
Yes.
All right, very quickly, the township is a member of the Suburban Communities Energy Special Improvement District, and ESID. ESIDs are put in place as the public portion of a mechanism to facilitate PACE financing. PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. It was established in Ohio back in 2010 through state legislation. In practice, it has been primarily a commercial financing mechanism for energy efficiency, renewable energy projects, for commercial development and redevelopment. It's not so much a change in legislation at this point in time, but there's been some practical issues with rolling out residential that I think are being overcome. So the Suburban Communities ESID is expanding their functionality, and they've adopted a residential plan. And as part of that, because we're members, we need to adopt it as well. In the crowd, we have Chris Jones from Bricker and Eckler, who is our PACE consultant on these matters, and he's just going to give a brief overview of the ESID and PACE, and what we're asking for today is adoption of that residential plan. Good.
Yeah, so again, Chris Jones, Bricker and Eckler, for full disclosure, I'm not an attorney, but I am a PACE expert. And I would just remind all of you is that the township's first project was the Kids First Sports Center back in early 17, and I believe there's been a couple of additional commercial property uses since that time. As Skylar said, back when in 17, when the Energy SID was formed, that Energy SID board essentially adopted a commercial plan. And so, and what that does then is that each commercial property owner who wants to utilize PACE financing, comes, before the ESID for approval and then in front of the township trustees for approval. As you would imagine, on, a single-family residential home, that is just not practical, and so, it has taken some time to really get the logistics and all the mechanics of that developed. And so, essentially, what has happened is that the Toledo Port Authority, in conjunction with the other port authorities around the state, including the Cincinnati Port, is the lead entity on a statewide uniform residential PACE program. And so each locale that does opt into this, as Skylar said, the first step is that Energy SID does have to approve the residential plan. Then all that does then is allow each individual jurisdiction to also approve the residential plan, which is in front of you today via resolution. But then getting into a couple of the specifics is that there is a cooperative agreement, a residential cooperative agreement, where essentially the township is authorizing the Toledo Port Authority to approve each of those homeowners as they apply for a residential PACE loan. And so that's kind of the first thing on the cooperative plan. We also do have the residential plan that you would be approving under this resolution. Again, the same plan that was approved by the ESID. The other thing I would point out too is just as far as flow of funds, as you know, in approving in the past, the commercial projects, the township is essentially a pass-through from the special assessment that is placed voluntarily, again, by the property owner on the property. County collects off of the tax bill, forwards to the township, and then the township forwards to the PACE vendor. In the residential sector, what will happen is that there will be one, on an annual basis, there will be one piece of legislation where we would come back in front of you in roughly July or August ahead of that September special assessment submission. And let's just say that we have 36 township homeowners actually use or authorize through PACE in the year, then that would just be a blanket legislative request to approve those homeowners that had already been approved by the Port Authority through the program. And then again, it gets put on the homeowner's property tax bill, those special assessments come back, and then at this time, there is one PACE lender, and then those, special assessment funds would then just be sent directly to that PACE lender. So I'll stop there. I think those are the main details, and so I'll stop there for questions.
Okay.
Just to clarify a few things, I think you've said much of this, but there's no cost to the township itself in participating in this, correct?
No cost.
There's no future tax abatement the township is facing a loss of potential tax revenues on either, right?
No, yeah, and so this does, it affects Jeff both on the commercial side and the residential
Mhm.
side. Yeah, this special assessment is only affecting that one parcel owner.
Okay.
Who requests this.
And it's enabling that parcel owner to do something with special financing, so it gives them an additional tool in their arsenal to finance energy improvements.
That is correct, and I guess I would go further to also say is that I like to refer to PACE financing as kind of a clean one-for-one, in the fact that that special assessment that's sitting on the property owner's tax bill as a line item doesn't really commingle with other incentives, like if it were in a TIF, there's been some projects that have tax credit developments and those types of things. And again, obviously, in full control of the township.
Okay.
The tax assessment is requested. It's completely voluntary and requested by the property owner.
Okay, and it
So-
travels with the property. If the property owner were to sell the property, it
Yes,
stays
sir.
affixed to the property until paid off.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In the contract, I'll just note for the record, there's a liability limitation for the township in there as well, that the township is never obligated to cause the payment of anything more than what comes in through these special assessments, correct? So, no risk, no downside to the township, in other words. Very good. I move, unless there's further discussion, I move that we
I think we
approve
have a resolution.
the resolution before us.
Deepak?
Mr. Chair, I have a resolution prepared by the Township's administrative staff, styled a resolution approving the Suburban Communities Energy Special Improvement District Residential Program Plan, authorizing and approving the execution, delivery, and performance of a Township Residential PACE Cooperative Agreement with respect to property assessed clean energy transactions in cooperation with the Suburban Communities Energy Special Improvement District and the Toledo-Lucas County Port Authority, authorizing the Toledo-Lucas Port Authority to approve petitions and plans for public improvements or public services submitted by the owners of real property within the township, requesting that their property be added to the territory of the Suburban Community Energy Special Improvement District and assessed for the cost of such plans on behalf of the Board of Township Trustees of the Township, and dispensing with the second reading.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Mr. LaBarber?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Weedman?
Aye.
Mr. Desai, you have another resolution?
I do. I have a second resolution also prepared by the Township's administrative staff. For your consideration, a resolution appointing Skylar R. Miller to serve on the Board of Directors of the Suburban Communities Energy Special Improvement District, Inc., and declaring an emergency.
Motion approved.
Second.
Mr. LaBarber?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Weedman?
Aye.
Okay, all right, next item is, development projects. It was requested by Mr. Warwick that we bring a few items to the board. We are looking for some direction, I apologize here, hang on. Technology's gonna get the better of me this morning. So we have three potential development projects. Two of them, at least in part, have township-owned land as a component of these projects. So, I know it's way down there. Here we go.
There you go.
Okay. So, in order to move forward on these, we are gonna be looking for direction from trustees. First one is, Montgomery Road at Kenwood. This is actually, property wholly owned by the township. It's approximately 6.5 acres. There has been, multiple parties that have notified us of their interest in developing this site. There are, with that, there's also two traffic and economic impact studies in this area that may be pertinent to the development of this site. And the zoning in place is simply just the SBI overlay, so there's no planned development, as it were, that's preset. So, because of the multiple parties who have interest in this, it may be appropriate to notify the public via RFP, RFQ that, you know, if we are in fact interested in selling this land, to entertain not only bids but proposals for how they would develop the site, and if that would be you know, in conformance to the desires of the board.
So, this property was acquired for the purposes of access management, and while Mr. James has suggested that it wasn't in the resolution, I don't believe we've ever had issues like that before where we've actually put it in specific for that. But let me say that we did use tax income and finance funds to purchase that. And under the agreement, or the service agreement in a tax income and financing district, you have certain things you can and cannot use that money for. And for us to just purchase the property because we thought we might want to own it was not one of the permissive things we could do with our tax income and finance dollars from the TIF funds that we used to purchase this property. So it was originally purchased for the purposes of access management. The law requires us to continue to pursue the use for access management until which time we've exhausted that. When we exhaust that, then we can go and relinquish the property for other purposes. But at this time, we can't, we have a traffic impact study that we're looking at, and until which time we have that completed and we have the ability to use the property for the purposes that we purchased it for originally, we cannot, state law does not allow us to relinquish this property. So I think for item number one, we'll still have to wait until we get the traffic study done before we can actually go sell this property. Sell the property or sell the residual of the property after we have addressed the access management issue that we purchased it for originally.
A board of trustees speaks through its motions and its resolutions and its minutes and its decisions. And with all due respect to Mr. Weedman, that may well be the intention of those purchases, but there's nothing in the public record which indicates any purpose of purchasing those properties other than that, quote, if I'm recalling right, the township is desirous of, end quote, purchasing each of those properties. There's been no specification of the access management need. There was no public purpose stated, in fact, other than that plain desire to purchase it in the record and in the minutes. If there were discussions outside of the public meetings about it being for access management, that may have happened and that shouldn't have happened. But there's nothing in the record as to that, and nothing in the record as to that to overcome, frankly. Mr. Desai might have an opinion on that or might disagree. I don't know that he's ferreted through all the resolutions out there, but if there is no statement other than the township is desirous of purchasing something, is that a purchase for a specific public purpose?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to go through the minutes or the resolutions for the purchase. I would just remind the trustees that because this is property that's in excess of $2,500, it would have to be done by auction or competitive sealed bid.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the only advice I'd want to give at this time. I'm happy to look into what language was put into the minutes or the resolutions regarding the purchase.
Let me ask you, if the trustees were to agree unanimously, following receipt of an RFP of some kind for some grand project that solves our traffic problems, brings in fabulous tax revenues, and, cures cancer and so forth there, does that still require a competitive bid as well, or is a unanimous vote something sufficient to sell property?
That's my read of 505.10. I've heard that somehow the unanimous vote would trump that, and certainly would be glad to look into that to see if that's the case. We have a CIC, and one of the purposes of CICs is to make sure the developer's vision matches the township's vision, and the CIC does allow for direct sale. So these are things that we can address through potentially transferring the property to the CIC for sale to somebody, to a developer or a group of developers that may have the same vision. So I think three different things there that we've talked about, but as things stand right now with the property, as I understand, it's still being titled in the township's name, I think you're limited to selling it through public auction or competitive bid.
Now, if the township were to go the CIC route and transfer the land into the CIC, that can be done as a transfer by vote of the trustees, correct? That does not require bidding by the CIC against outsiders.
Correct. And that's a majority vote.
Well, do you know, is that a majority vote?
I believe it is, but I'm going to double check that.
Okay. I would hope we all unify behind some vision as to what would happen with this project anyway, but would that transfer?
I believe you guys might be the directors of the CIC, I'm not sure.
Yeah. This is true. Would such a transfer have to happen before an RFP occurred, on the other hand? I would think not, if it's just contemplating potential uses of property, assuming it's available.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would probably, I don't know if you'd want to do an RFP or RFQ, but no, you could do it in advance of transferring it to the CIC.
Okay. I think it would be helpful to see some of the competing visions developers have for the site that might solve our traffic problems as well, and bring something nice to the area that doesn't encroach on the neighbors behind it in some way that's disturbing to them either, but that is an overall win for everyone in the township. So I think that's something worth proceeding with. You were about to say something, I think.
Mr. Desai, not for this discussion, but for, I'm assuming, a continuance of it, will you research 505.10 A6 as it pertains to the sale of land?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have Mr. Warwick, did we get an appraisal back yet? We had asked for this in October. Do we have an appraisal on the property?
We don't have it back yet, but any day now is what they're telling me.
Was there some sort of snag in that process?
Well, the board had asked for an appraisal, and the outgoing administrator told them to drop it. At least that's what they told me.
Okay, but it's back on track now.
Yes, yes.
One thing, Mr. James, that the board might want to consider is if you're going to go through the RFP process to determine what visions developers might have out there, that's something the CIC can do as well. And it might make sense to do that on the front end as opposed to doing it on the back end. Just to have the CIC being the one that actually puts out the RFP request as opposed to township. Not saying it has to be that way, just suggesting that might be a better sequence.
In projects of this nature, I know that most communities will actually go to an RFQ and not an RFP. I know Montgomery did that for their project at Ronald Reagan and Montgomery Road. I think it's more prudent to do that probably, to open it up so that we certainly want, this is a kind of the heart and soul of our business district, and the last thing we want is to have development done by somebody that maybe is not all that qualified to do it, but they came in with a big check to write because they acquired the property. So I think it would be probably more prudent to switch that to an RFQ and go through the process that way, because, and again, most communities do that in projects as substantial as this, so.
Would you want to do that before contemplating a transfer to CIC, or either way?
I think we could do that before the RFQ, and I would recommend, before we address the CIC issue, but I would suggest that you get with City of Montgomery. I read their RFQ was a pretty good RFQ, so, if you might wanna get with them and it'll give you some guidelines as to how to prepare that.
They did an RFQ for the properties around the roundabout, the interchange, correct?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
so the two car dealers.
That's good.
I think I sent that, did I include you on that the other day?
I think I did see it just the
Yeah.
other day.
Okay.
So that's where I saw it.
Okay.
I don't know if the CIC is necessary based on 505-10A6. So that's something I think we need to get a full determination on. And that same language also states that it requires unanimous vote of the trustees. If you move that to the CIC, is that requirement still in place, or does it change that approval process? So.
We'll look at that and get back to us.
Two questions that flow from that. First of all, have we updated whatever we need to as to the CIC boards and any other boards we have as to current membership, where the members were composed of our former administrator, for example, and former trustees?
We would not do that until we have our next meeting, which I believe is.
It's the, March 5th.
March
Yeah,
5th.
March 5th.
We just want to make sure we take care of those things,
Yep.
and I assume they require a vote of the trustees for the appointments as well, rather than just assuming someone moves into a position. Second concern, Mr. Weidman raises a valid point about TIF funding being used to purchase some of those properties over time. We need to assess what the impact of that would be in any sale which occurs or in any CIC transfer, if that actually occurred rather than a sale. I don't know what the finances of that particular TIF are right now, and whether Mr. Warwick has a handle on that one yet. I know you've been looking at those, but I assume if the money is captive in the TIF in some way, one option might be just pay off any obligations in the TIF and collapse it, if that made sense at that point. We stop robbing the county of some of their additional tax revenues they'd otherwise be getting if we ended early, on the other hand. But is that something you've had a chance to look at as to this?
Not yet. We have all the data now for each TIF. We just haven't gone back now and gone through line by line. So I don't really know the
Okay.
status of that TIF.
Okay. Why did we use TIF money to buy adjacent land outside of the TIF years ago? Do you know why that was, Mr. Weidman?
I can't answer that. That was not, Doug would probably answer that probably better than me.
Okay. I assume it's because that's where the money was at the time, but, yeah.
All right.
So do we want to
It would
continue to
have to
get?
have been permissive, by the way.
Hmm.
It would have been permissive within the service agreement on that TIF.
Oh, I know.
To do that.
I'm not suggesting it was illegitimate.
Yeah.
That's where buckets of money are sometimes, and so that would make sense if that's the case.
So proceeding forward, what do we want to do? What do you suggest? Do we continue to get bids on this property, or proposals?
Well, we haven't received any bids. There's been
proposals.
some very informal,
Yeah.
requests, I suppose, from developers, from the public, just letting us know that they're interested in the property. So.
I think it would be useful to have proposals in some kind, whether it's RFP, RFQ, something. We need some things to compare in what we're looking at here. And, we have our own visions of what might go there. Other private developers might have some much better vision of what could go there that would provide great balance and a central focal point for our community there.
Let me look at Montgomery's RFQ.
Okay.
And see if we can use that as a template moving forward. If that's all right.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, I know that's the way Montgomery did. They did an RFQ so that consultant people could establish their teams, get that information to them. Once they established those teams, then they went out for an RFP afterwards to get the proposals.
All right, any further conversation on item 1? Okay. Second is the Reading Road properties. This is kind of a small island portion of the township. There are some multifamily residences. There's I believe, one office building, and then the Drake and Carousel properties, which have historically been, hotel motel sites. The township does own approximately 28 acres, in this area. Very little of that is actually road frontage on Reading Road. A lot of that property has to be, accessed via, Tracy, is it Chaucer?
Chaucer, yes.
Chaucer, yes. But there has been one developer that has notified us of their interest in purchasing at least some of that property. So at this time, there hasn't been any zoning approvals that would permit immediate development of the site. And the Reading Road corridor is, that actual plan that was developed regionally, is still under review. I'm actually meeting with them tomorrow, to see if I can get some updated information on that. But in essence, you know, I was asked to bring this property to your attention and see what you would like me to, or how you'd like me to proceed.
So I'm assuming that Blue Tide is the interested party?
Yes, sir.
So are you familiar with what they want to do with that?
I am. There was a meeting here at the township, where, Mr. Pelfrey, spoke of his intentions. There was a multifamily component where he would be, providing services to veterans. And there was also the potential for renovating some of the office space, along the corridor, and then also an agricultural component as well.
So is that consistent with the Reading Road corridor study? That use?
I don't believe it fully is consistent, no,
Okay.
but I need to do more research on
Okay.
that.
Yeah. I can tell you that we've had conversations with Blue Tide. They were interested in converting the Drake Motel to what they called veteran housing. And I'm all for veterans, helping veterans and veterans and doing veterans housing. The problem was, they told us that they couldn't guarantee how many would be veterans housing versus would be just for the general public. And they even got to the point where they said, well, we'll have at least one veteran housing unit. So they really weren't all that committed to the veteran housing portion. It was kind of like their sales tool to the township. The second thing was, I met with Todd Portune and Pelfrey and the folks from Roselawn and the folks from Amberley. We all met downtown, and it's not consistent at all with the Reading Road corridor plan, which they've been working on for a very long time. Number one. Number two, as was suggested by the representative from Roselawn, we don't want to put veterans into housing that's in a unit the size of a jail cell. And that's basically what the size of the units were at the Drake. So I would proceed with significant caution on this proposal. I think we should do significant due diligence on Blue Tide and what they've done over in other areas, because I know there were some issues with some of their properties. And lastly, to sell off the property of the 8 acres of the former Ramada property, to sell off, that was the only frontage we had on Reading Road. To do that would decrease the value of all of the acreage we have behind it, because now we're left with only access through Chaucer. So I would caution us as to be careful, not to make sure that we don't relinquish the only frontage we have on that road, number one. And finally, I would say that one of the reasons we purchased that property was we knew that in the near future, ODOT is working on the through the valley plan on I-75. phase 3, 4, and 5 are gonna come up between 2022 and 2025, and in that process, it is engineered for a full exchange. As you know, the exchange there at I-75 and Ronald Reagan and Galbraith is a total mess right now. But it's engineered for a full change, as I understand, for that interchange. That increases the value substantially of that property. You can't go anywhere in central Hamilton County and find 28 acres developable, that's currently developable the way we have it here on that property. So my recommendation would be to tread lightly on how we proceed, until which time, the last thing we want to do is sell frontage out to Blue Tide. They're using it for a use that really isn't consistent with everything that's been planned on the Reading Road corridor for an extended period of time, and then diminish the value of the residual property we do own. So I would caution that.
Have we got do we ever get an appraisal on that? Are we gonna get an appraisal on that? Can we get an appraisal on that land?
So there is a appraisal from 2007. The same appraiser is doing the first project. I believe we've reached out to him to request an update. But we don't have anything at this time.
Couple questions. One for Mr. Desai, or maybe Mr. Weidman might know if this occurred on purpose. A few years back, the trustees, I think in 2017 possibly, the trustees voted to transfer title of one of the two parcels to the CIC. The other was already there. And the title transfer never actually happened after the trustees voted for it to happen. There's no deed of record. I know you were looking into that or had that on your list. Have you discovered anything about that, or was there a reason why?
No, I don't.
So there's still a resolution out there saying transfer it.
I would yield to Doug on that, because Doug probably was the person that was supposed to do that. I was unaware that it was not transferred.
Okay.
When we voted on it, I assumed that it was being transferred.
Yeah, there was no record undoing that resolution later, and nothing that I saw about it, so I think it's still supposed to happen. But that would unify title in the CIC as to the entire 28 acres there, I think. So if you would check with Mr. Miller about that, let's find out what happened.
He's out of town until March, so we will have that answer here in about 14 days.
Okay. All right. And also I note that, Scholar, you noted on here there's no JED as to those properties, and that's an interesting point, because we, or our CIC, which we control, is the owner of those properties and could give consent even now, I would think, to imposing a JED on that land if there's reason to go ahead and do that, if someone would partner with us on that. Is there utility in doing that now to make sure it's in place in case there is some change in state law later, which might interfere with our ability to do it? That way, we'd be able to collect income taxes from the commercial district there going forward, regardless of what goes in and how it's apportioned. Any thoughts from anyone on that?
I don't know that there's I'll yield to you, Deepak, but I don't know that there's a need to accelerate a JED on that property without any development plans.
The only thing that I think Mr. James raised a point at one time, that during construction you obviously have construction workers who are making wages that could be subject to an income tax that we could collect. So that's a potential revenue source. The only other thing I would mention is, as you saw from the presentation before, it's not a very quick process to get a JED in place. So, to your point, yeah, there's probably no rush to do it, but I also wouldn't delay very long if that's the ultimate goal, because you probably have, a 90 to 120 days lined up at least, if you've got all your ducks in a row to get the JED in place.
We have a unique opportunity to do that while we own the property, and it's not going to be, or it's unlikely to be residentially developed, I would say, although that's a possibility, and I assume JEDs can be undone if that's the case. I don't think we want to impose tax on our residents and their households. We've been careful to avoid doing that anywhere. We want to hit up the outsiders for the money, I suppose. But I think it's something we should look at. We should resolve the title question first, I think, but I think we should potentially revisit this.
Okay?
Okay.
Bud?
Alright, last project, for consideration today is, Greens at Kenwood. This is, there's an office complex that's, proposed on Ronald Reagan Road. This property is actually, adjacent to the highway. It is wholly owned by Nair Properties. There is a TIF on the site. But there is a public parking garage, that has been financed, I believe through the port, on this site. At this time, there's a need to renegotiate the TIF agreement. Nair Properties had included a specific tenant for the first building, which is currently approved, and has received full zoning compliance. That named tenant will no longer occupy that building. So at this point in time, we need to see, I need to see how the board wants to proceed with negotiations on that TIF.
So, can I go back to the history on this project?
Yes, sir.
So we originally approved this property for, collectively, this was all owned by Nair Properties. The property included all the property that the FBI currently sits on today. It includes the property that the hotel currently sits on today. And it includes the property that you're referencing here, the remaining property behind the hotel. In the process, we approved the FBI project with, I believe we have 100-foot setbacks there, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's 100-foot.
I think so.
We approved part of the deal was we agreed to TIF on this property to the tune of, I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was $7 million.
I believe there's $7 million available, yes, sir.
No, there's not $7 million available, we already used some of it.
Total
But-
is what
Yeah,
we
total,
figured.
and then an additional $1 million to mitigate water issues to build the hotel pad.
Yes.
So we came to an agreement, the service agreement was signed by Nair Properties. We moved forward on it, we purchased property, we engineered a road, we built the road, we paid out the $1 million for the pad for the hotel. In that, we got our JED, which actually that was part of the JED Z. And we approved 266,000 square feet of office. 266,000 square feet of office on that property. Well, when Nair Properties, the downturn came, Nair Properties came back to us and said, and let me just say that the 266,000, using the equation of, that we use to calculate generally what we might gain in joint economic development zone income, was significant. That's one of the reasons why we were so interested in pursuing this. Although we didn't have JEDs in place at the time, we had talked about them for a while. And when the estate tax was eliminated in Ohio, it forced us to take that route. But at any rate, so we had 266,000 square feet approved. Then the downturn came, and Nair Properties came back to us and said, look, we really can't get that finance. We need 60% commitment on the building. We can't get 66% or 60% of 266,000 square feet. We just can't do it. There's no user that big. So we agreed to two 100,000 square foot office buildings. Now we are looking at 100,000 square feet of office. We've now cut our JEDS revenue more than in half. And one of the reasons why we agreed to, in this November, December, one of the reasons why we agreed to approve the 100,000 square feet of office for the remaining 3.1, I want to say, in TIF, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. We agreed to that because they were going to bring in a Northwest Mutual, which was a very significant insurance company that would have paid us significantly on our JEDs, much higher than what our base average calculations on JEDs would have produced. And so the board in November, December agreed to that. Now, we're saying we're going to eliminate the clause that includes Northwest Mutual and allow it to open up to anybody, any tenant that comes into that building. And so you see where we've gone. We've gone from 266,000 square feet to 200,000 square feet to 100,000 square feet with a great financial tenant to now 100,000 square feet with maybe not such a great financial tenant. And so I caution the board, we do have a service agreement with Nair Properties, and I think that I caution the board that if we remove that, we remove the clause that includes Northwest Mutual, we should definitely include some form of additional square footage to compensate for the loss that we were gonna get.
I guess that's why it's in front of you today. The staff is not proposing that we take that out, without any discussion. It was brought to our attention by Nair representatives that they're no longer able to secure Northwest Mutual.
Well, all of this discussion is just what I wanted to happen when I asked Skylar to put this on there, because we want to have some instruction of what to do next on all of these. The other thing, I don't know if you mentioned or not, with the Nair property is this idea that the Port Authority would own the garage because they can build it without prevailing wage. And that's another wrinkle that wasn't in there in the beginning, I don't think.
It was not.
But we just simply want to move these forward in whatever appropriate way, because everybody's asking all the time, when are we going to do that? So all of the discussion on these things is helpful and useful to us. And I think we have an idea of 2 or 3 things we can go ahead and get done and bring back to you. The one with Nair is, the zoning's done, they're there.
Zoning is approved for one of the last 2 buildings.
And do they own all the property now?
We do. Well, we already agreed on the TIP. I don't know why, is there any benefit with the Port Authority to us to go that direction? I mean, we spent hours going over this, the TIP, to approve this.
Well, the specific thing that Mr. Warwick and I have talked about, and I think that some of you are aware of, is the way the TIP works, we have to own the public improvement on the property. And so if the Port Authority is gonna come in and it's going to be the Port Authority parking garage, how can we release TIP funds for something we don't own? That's sort of the.
That's another issue, yes.
Yes. And my suggestion for that would be, because I understand the developer is championing the idea that it would be a good idea to have the Port Authority do that, is ask them to discuss with the Port Authority, how is it that we can release TIF monies for a project we don't know, as opposed to paying me to go out and try to figure that out. Port Authority has some very good attorneys over there, and I suspect they've crossed this bridge before.
Good idea, I'll do that.
So what other guidance do you need from us right now?
You know what, this one's very open-ended. This is the developer coming back to us saying, we can't meet our obligations under the current agreement. They're looking for assistance from us. They were also asking us to recalculate what the available TIF dollars are on site, because they believe they may need additional improvements for access purposes. So I'm trying today, at least to gauge the temperament of the board on this site. And I don't have a recommendation at this time. I'm looking to, you know, as I move forward with discussions with Nair, you know, again, what's the temperament of the board, so I can be responsive to that.
Some of the Nair people have spoken with me about a few things about it too, and yeah, they're concerned there's not enough money in the TIF to fund the parking there now because it was based on pricing back when we put it in place, and parking costs more. That's apparently part of their concern. You're more familiar with what the finances of that might be than me, I think. They've also suggested the FBI building is substantially undervalued, and whatever calculations went into figuring its value for TIF purposes. I don't know if that's something revisitable either, of course, but
I think that's the auditor. That's the auditor.
Yeah.
The auditor's
Yeah,
gonna
that's
make
the
the
auditor.
decision with the value.
Yeah, it would have
Yeah.
to go to Board of Revision, I would think.
Yeah. But, and in terms of the port being involved, I know I've been asked about that as well. My only concern with that, which I've expressed to you and you, Ray and Skylar, is that we do want to make sure we don't somehow end up with the short end of the stick on that deal, as FC Cincinnati managed to do with port funding. As long as we're protected in the end, I don't have a problem with the port being involved. They did the Kenwood Collection parking garage as well, and we're not facing any long-term surprises with that we know of, but we don't want the property ending up tax exempt in the end somehow after whatever TIFs end and us not getting revenues from it.
There's a parallel project that we're working on internally where we're trying to identify all the TIFs and, you know, their current status as far as what they're producing, what's obligated. You know, before we discuss, you know, making more funds available or set, I think we need to finish that project.
Yes.
So. Okay.
Okay. Anything else in zoning?
I have one more item. This is just a preview of the public hearing that will be on March 5th. This is our first technology. This is our first case for 2020. This is 2020-01 MA, Myers White Cooper Company. This is the property just down the street from us, the two new office buildings. They are requesting approval of a signage plan in excess of what was approved at the time and in excess of zoning resolution. Essentially, I'll kind of summarize this. The way it was approved at the time, I believe in 2018, was that each building would be subject to the standard zoning resolution requirements for signage, which under that calculation would give them 2 signs per building. Very briefly here, this is the site just down the street from us. As you can see from their site plan, they have 2 entrances per building with a maximum of 6 spaces per building. This is modular in a sense of, depending on their the tenants that they sign on, they can combine these. Their fear is that if they have more than 2 tenants per building, those additional tenants will not be represented, and it'll make their property less viable. So this is a very basic elevation showing what their request would be for if they were to receive maximum occupancy of 6 tenants per building. So they would be asking for 6 individual signs, fairly small actually. I think on average they would be between 8 and 12 square feet each, and they would all be of a consistent style, no illumination, either internally lit or illuminated from the exterior. but they would be, solid post, post signs, I guess is the best way to explain it. So this is an example from one of their other sites. And as you can see, very, very simple, clean lettering, and that's the request. So I won't go into it too much today. I don't wanna go into a discussion, ahead of the public hearing, but it's been, the practice in the past to, make you aware of these cases and go over it. So, that's all I have.
That's BZA, correct?
Please?
That's BZA.
No, that's actually zoning
Is it?
commission.
Okay.
Yeah. This was this came in as a plan development.
Oh, okay.
Through zoning commission, so, the increase in signage requires the major adjustment.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
zoning commission did approve this, at their last meeting, and so it'll be in front of you first of March.
Okay.
Mr. Miller, is that it?
That's all I have.
Thank you. Now,
Wait,
Mr. Porter?
well, and I'm sorry, we'll talk
Go
about it in the
ahead.
hearing. No, we'll talk about it in the hearing. That's
Mr.
fine.
Porter,
Um,
fiscal officer items?
I've got no comment.
Nothing? Trustee items?
I will just mention that we do have our Hamilton County Township Association meeting coming up on the 27th of February, which is held annually statutorily by the county engineer, and it will be Ted Hubbard's last meeting.
A few comments and requests. I think I mentioned this to Mr. Miller, or I'm sorry, to Mr. Warwick last week, but I'll mention it to Ms. Gunderson as well. I think she's the one who actually handles this sort of thing. In recent years, the board has moved from actually posting, this is technical, but posting text-based PDFs of its resolutions and minutes on the website to a scan of the actual signed documents that the trustees have signed, which I think is a good thing. But they're no longer containing searchable text when that happens. Is it possible to OCR those as well when we put them on there, so that there's a searchable public record as well? Do you know if we have that capability?
Since I don't know what OCR is,
Optical character recognition. It converts the scanned image to text, so it's searchable. Sorry, I'm a geek here, so I speak computer.
I can check.
Okay, thank you. I think that would be helpful, just so we've got a record of what was actually signed, which is the actual resolution or minutes, but it's searchable. And also, Mr. Janis has pointed this out to me vocally a few times, and I guess technically he's correct. In our minutes, we sometimes note if someone is absent, we note that they've been excused from the meeting. And we don't really have rules that I know of specifying exactly who has to be at these meetings other than us elected officials anyway. Unless there's a vote of the board choosing to excuse someone, technically there's been no excuse. There's just an absence to note. I would suggest stylistically in our minutes going forward, we adopt that practice unless we actually take a vote. But that leads to the next consideration, which is I think it would be useful for the board to have some rules about our meetings, actually a little better defined as to what the structure of our meetings are, who we expect to have here typically, and the order that we'll conduct. That gives us some guidelines to work within. So if we start arguing about politics, for example, someone can point to the rules and say, you know, you said in the rules you're not going to go off topic about that. Let's stick to the rules. Or if there's something else that might be out of order that occurs, we've got some rules to refer to rather than arbitrary picking and choosing about what our rules might be. I know I've shared an example with some of the staff and maybe some of the trustees. Westchester has a nice set of rules they've adopted for that, for example, and some of the other larger urban townships around us have those as well. So I think that might be useful going forward, and I'll work with the administrator and with Ms. Gunderson perhaps to propose some that we as a board can consider, but I'd invite my fellow trustees to have input on that certainly too, just so we have some basic guidelines of the practices we'll follow and who should be here so that we know whether we need to excuse someone or not if they're not here. That's all I've got. Thank you.
We were at the OTA, Ohio Township Association meetings in Columbus last week. Went to a whole bunch of meetings, some ideas townships have. I like the business breakfast that Washington Township has in Montgomery County. We might think about that. Several other ideas. I-71 and Kenwood Road, our sign there, is it visible? Can we trim the bushes around that sign?
It's already done.
It's done now? Okay. And then one of the things I was concerned about was township vehicles. we have township vehicles that, I know Kevin Clark has one for the zoning, and there's no marking on the sides of that vehicle. Can we get markings on that in the same way with Tracy's vehicle? Mr. Warwick?
Yeah. We can get some prices and bring it back to you.
Okay. I don't know if there are other township vehicles out there that don't have markings?
No, but I'll bring this up if I may. In addition to markings, because Mr. Clark's vehicle is stopped on the side of the road quite often, I'd like to get a price for you for installing a light kit for safety purposes.
It's a great idea.
Great.
Yeah.
We've done that internally in the past, but I think our folks at the fire department have been sick and unable to do that, and it's a daily concern for me. So we'll get some prices and bring that back to you.
That's a very good idea, and I'm sure you know better than me, but there are legal requirements as to what colors you can use and placement
Yes.
and all of that, so, okay.
Okay, just on the calendar, next township meeting, workshop meeting is on March 3rd, 9 o'clock. Same place, March 5th, Thursday night, 7 o'clock township meeting, and
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Mr. Barber?
Aye.
Mr. James?
Aye.
Mr. Weedman?
Aye.